040 hours, September 26, 1983, Serpukhov 15. Early warning station, southwest of Moscow. The concrete facility hums like a sealed engine. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Inside the main control room, 20 consoles cast a sterile green glow across tired eyes and sweating brows. It smells of metal, recycled air, and tension too familiar to notice. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov adjusts his headset. He's the duty officer tonight responsible for Soviet nuclear retaliation protocol. He logs a thermal anomaly report. Standard procedure. Then it happens. His console flashes red. One missile. Inbound. From the United States. Trajectory intercontinental. Impact window 22 minutes. Petrov doesn't move. His operators scramble, recalculating. The alarm doesn't stop. 27 seconds later, 4 more missiles appear. 5 ICBMs. Confirmed. The room freezes. No sirens. No movement. Just numbers. 5 warheads, each capable of incinerating a city. American Minuteman III missiles. If the computer is to be believed, it can't be a glitch. Soviet satellite logic is binary. Thermal detection, infrared signature, algorithmic triangulation. If it says 5, it's 5. The officer beside Petrov whispers, "Is this it?" Petrov doesn't answer. Procedure is clear alert, the general staff. Confirm with ground radar. Prepare a retaliatory launch. But the ground radar shows nothing. Just open sky, no cloud cover, no jamming, no malfunction, just absence. The machine says war. The Earth stays silent. And now one man, alone in the algorithm's shadow, has minutes to decide trust the screen or trust himself. No confirmation, no precedent, just red light and silence. Moscow waits for his call. He doesn't make it. Mourning, if it can be called that, in the underground conference suite of the Soviet General Staff. No windows, just charts, war tables, and men trained to end civilizations in under 10 minutes. The alert transcript sits on the table. 5 inbound warheads, confirmed by satellite, rejected by radar. Marshal Sergei Akrameyev leans over the report. His face is granite, his voice colder. "No one launches 5 missiles," he says. General Viktor Morozov grunts. The Americans would never strike first, not unless they want to die second. Another general flips pages. False positives are statistically impossible. We built the software ourselves. They nod, not in agreement, in defiance. The OKO early warning system, freshly operational, was supposed to be infallible, designed to see infrared plumes from U.S. ICBM launches. It relied on orbital satellites triangulating heat signatures. Any one missile might be a glitch, but 5, that was war. Except, radar saw nothing. A major from the communications division speaks up. It could be a NATO probe, a spoof. Psychological warfare to stress test our response. They consider it, for 10 seconds. Then it's dismissed. No Western simulation can forge that exact thermal signature. This was either real, or it was an error in our sky. Someone laughs, quietly. Akrameyev doesn't. Nothing that expensive makes mistakes. Behind the table, a junior aide holds a file. His hands shake. It's Petrov's statement. He disobeyed protocol, didn't elevate the alert, waited, made no call. The generals read the first line. No radar confirmation. I chose to withhold alert. Another silence. One general says, he risked everything. Another replies, he saved everything but not allowed, not officially, no commendation, no thanks, no reassessment of doctrine. Instead, a consensus forms the system worked. The human failed to trust it. They believe in the satellite, because they built it, because they funded it, because its errors would be their own. The machine showed apocalypse. They called it a phantom, and moved on. To understand how close the world came to ending that night, you must first understand the system built to end it. The Soviet Union called it OKO the Eye, not metaphor, literal design. It was the eye of nuclear war. Launched in 1982, The OKO satellite constellation formed the Soviet Union's first space-based missile launch detection system. Its purpose was singular: to detect the heat bloom of American ICBMs the moment they left their silos. OKO satellites didn't listen. They watched, orbiting high above the Earth. Their infrared sensors scanned for the unique thermal signature of a rocket piercing the atmosphere. The moment a plume was detected, the satellite would triangulate position, plot trajectory, and trigger alert protocols all in seconds. The goal was speed. The doctrine behind it: launch on warning. If the United States fired, the USSR would not wait for impact. It would retaliate the moment it believed an attack was inbound. Delay meant death. The designers were confident. Chief Engineer A.G. Basov had built the system with a single principle: redundancy through certainty. Infrared cannot lie. He once told Pravda, "Thermal truth is universal." On paper, it made sense. The system included space-based IR sensors to detect launches, ground-based command centers to verify data, early warning radars for trajectory confirmation, and command relays to strategic rocket forces. It was engineered to compress apocalypse into under 7 minutes. But in all its brilliance, OKO had one blind spot. It didn't understand the atmosphere. Sunlight bouncing off high-altitude clouds at specific angles could create false thermal signatures. The system couldn't distinguish rocket flame from solar glint, not at dawn. Not when the geometry aligned just right. And on September 26, 1983, the geometry was perfect. OKO did not malfunction. It did what it was told. It saw 5 missiles. It declared war. It followed the math. What it lacked was doubt. They had built an eye to see the end of the world, but no one taught it to blink. 0:40 hours, first red light, 1 launch, coordinates US Midwest, trajectory Moscow, impact window 22 minutes, 0:40:27, second light, then third, fourth, fifth, each one identical, spaced perfectly. 5 missiles. The command room at Serpukhov 15 goes silent. A wave of heat from the machinery, then cold, the kind that climbs the spine when numbers mean annihilation. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov watches the screen. No alarm sound, no sirens, just data. The system is designed for this. 5 missiles mean a limited decapitation strike, meant to blind and cripple Soviet command. The protocol is simple: confirm, elevate, retaliate. But Petrov doesn't move. He understands the code behind the screen. He helped train officers on missile signature patterns. He knows what infrared is supposed to detect. He knows what it sometimes mistakes. He stares at the monitor. 5 missiles, the duty technician says, voice barely audible. Petrov looks down at his phone. The red handset connects him to command. 1 word, and the nuclear triad goes on alert. Instead, he waits. 2 minutes pass, then 3. He asks for radar confirmation from ground sites. None. The screen says war. The radars say sky. Still, he doesn't call. He leans closer to the console. The light pulses. It's not lying. It's doing exactly what it was programmed to do. But it's wrong. 0:47 hours. The launch window closes. No impact. No second wave. The lights go dark. The operator exhales. Petrov records the event in the log. False alarm. No launch detected. He breaks protocol. He doesn't break the world. The report hit the desks before dawn. Moscow's initial reaction wasn't alarm, it was suspicion. Petrov had violated protocol. He had received a confirmed alert from OKO, the Union's most advanced warning system, and failed to elevate it. No call to the general staff. No escalation to nuclear readiness. His superiors were furious. He disobeyed direct operational procedure. One colonel wrote, he jeopardized national security. Petrov was summoned for questioning within hours. Not as a hero, as a liability, he explained calmly. There was no radar confirmation. The satellite signature was too clean, too perfect. 5 identical missile readings in a row. No scatter, no deviation. It looked manufactured. He told them. But logic wasn't part of the debriefing. Procedure was. You are not tasked with interpretation, a senior officer said. You are tasked with execution. Petrov nodded. But he didn't apologize. Behind the scenes, not everyone agreed. Colonel General Mikhailov, liaison to the Strategic Rocket Forces, read the logs and stayed silent for several minutes. Then he said, "The Americans don't start wars with 5 missiles. Another officer added, "This wasn't an attack. It was a glitch, or a ghost, or the sun bouncing off the wrong clouds." But no one dared admit the deeper truth: they were seconds away from global war. And one man chose not to follow the system designed to prevent hesitation. The institution couldn't reward that. So they buried it. No medals, no formal investigation into OKO's logic failure. The incident was sealed. Petrov reassigned, forgotten. He hadn't saved the world. He had disobeyed it. They dismissed the moment not because they knew it wasn't war, but because they feared what it meant if it had been, and they'd been wrong. The first explanation came quickly and conveniently, within 48 hours. Soviet engineers blamed the incident on solar interference, a routine atmospheric phenomenon. The sun had reflected off high-altitude clouds. They said, creating thermal patterns that OKO interpreted as missile plumes. No fault in the system. No flaw in the design. Just bad luck. They ran simulations, adjusted satellite parameters, introduced new filters into the detection algorithm. It was enough to call it solved. Internally, they labeled it a low-orbit albedo anomaly. To the generals, it sounded technical. To the engineers, it was plausible. To everyone else, it was a relief. A team from the Ministry of Defense visited Serpukhov 15. They reviewed logs, inspected the terminals, interviewed Petrov. Quietly. No reprimand. No commendation. Just procedural closure. The report concluded incident caused by rare atmospheric alignment. No hostile action suspected. Mitigation protocols updated. The fix was digital. A few lines of code, a safety delay on burst detections, more data smoothing. The screen would blink slower next time. No questions were asked about the core design flaw. No one challenged the logic that allowed a machine to decide the fate of nations based on 5 seconds of sunlight. Confidence returned. Because the explanation sounded like physics, because the fix sounded like control. But under the surface, nothing had changed. The system still treated information as truth, still lacked redundancy, still assumed that silence meant correctness. They patched the math, but not the fragility of their faith in the machine. Weeks passed. The satellite filters were updated. Engineers wrote off the incident, but not everyone believed it was the sun. In a quiet wing of Lubyanka, the KGB opened a silent file: possible NATO sabotage. Some believed the satellite software had been compromised perhaps years earlier. The logic too specific, too clean. 5 missiles, evenly spaced, exactly the kind of scenario that would force a Soviet decision without overwhelming them. They called it Zalozhnaya Programa, the planted protocol. The theory spread. What if the CIA had somehow introduced corrupted logic into OKO's firmware? During satellite assembly, during launch prep, a single line of miscode could simulate 5 American launches using harmless reflections. It didn't need to fire a shot, just provoke panic, just test Soviet response under pressure. No proof, no signals intercepted, no agents exposed. But in the shadow world of intelligence, absence of evidence was never evidence of absence. The KGB assigned handlers to review personnel connected to satellite calibration. 2 engineers were relocated. A telemetry specialist was questioned for hours over minor inconsistencies in code archives. None were arrested. None were cleared. Paranoia spread through the command architecture. Officers grew hesitant to speak openly about OKO. Trust in the system, once absolute, fractured in silence. While the generals accepted the atmospheric theory, The intelligence community hunted ghosts. Mistrust replaced certainty, not in the enemy but in each other. And the next time a red light blinked, commanders hesitated. They had solved nothing. They just stopped believing the system was theirs alone. While they hunted traitors, the real threat sat blinking quietly in orbit, waiting for another cloud, waiting for another angle, waiting to be believed again. The KGB and GRU launched a full-spectrum investigation. Their target, the absence of war. They pulled intercepted NATO communications from September 26th. Nothing. No elevation of DEFCON, no movement of submarines, no hotlines activated. Washington slept through the most dangerous moment of the Cold War and never knew it happened. Spy networks in West Germany, Turkey, and the UK were tapped for insight. No alerts, no drills, no war posture. The Americans were calm because they had never launched anything. The Soviets had nearly launched everything. The GRU dispatched a science team to examine orbital records. They confirmed the sun's angle that night had bounced off cloud formations at high altitude, perfectly aligned with the satellite's line of sight. It had created a thermal mirage, bright, brief, and terrifying. But that wasn't what terrified them most. It was the realization that their most sophisticated warning system had no means to compensate. The Americans had long since incorporated sun angle correction in their early warning architecture. Their satellites filtered out solar glint, atmospheric scatter, even auroral distortions. The Soviets had assumed raw detection was enough. They were wrong. The problem wasn't the satellite. It was the absence of verification. No radar echo, no seismic signature, no ocean wake. Just 5 red lights in a vacuum of context. The Soviets had built a window into apocalypse, but they hadn't built a framework to understand what they were seeing. Sergei Vlasenko, a KGB analyst assigned to the case, wrote the classified conclusion, "Our technology sees faster than our minds can comprehend. We must slow the machine before it outruns reason." But his memo was buried. No officer wanted to slow a system built to be faster than thought. The red light had gone out. That was enough for now. The Americans faced the same problem, but they solved it differently. While the Soviets built sensors to detect launches, the United States built a system to confirm them, and then confirm them again. Early warning radar pave pause. Soviet assumption radar is slow, delay inevitable, coverage spotty. American reality pave pause, phased array warning system. Fixed installations with 240 greater coverage. Instant beam steering. No mechanical movement. Near real-time detection from horizon to upper atmosphere. Refresh rate under 10 seconds. Soviet ground radar took 30. Multi-layer launch confirmation. The Soviets relied on 2 layers, satellite detection and radar confirmation. Both separate, both vulnerable. The Americans fused 4, infrared from satellites, seismic tremors from ground sensors, acoustic signatures from undersea microphones, atmospheric shock waves from stratospheric detectors. No one point of failure. Each signal had a counterpart. In 1985, a Soviet sub-test launch was detected by 3 layers in 14 seconds. No alert issued. Confirmation killed panic. Human-in-the-loop AI. The Soviets built warning chains that handed decisions upward. Manual confirmation. Human override. The Americans built filters. Anomalies didn't go to generals, they went to algorithms first. Only validated threats reached humans. If the math didn't align, the system stayed silent. False positives were buried by probability, infrared and atmospheric correction. Where Soviet satellites read thermal bloom as gospel, the U.S. satellites corrected based on context, sun angle correction, cloud masking, seasonal adjustment, pattern learning. No single signature triggered an alert. It had to match a sequence, a cadence, a known behavior. Petrov saw 5 dots. American software would have seen a cloud. Combat example. November 1985, Soviet ICBM test, detected by U.S. DSP satellite, confirmed by seismic sensors in Alaska, Alert threshold not crossed. Radar tracked trajectory. No panic, no escalation. Credential drop number 6. Dr. William Perry. Then Secretary of Defense oversaw the implementation of those fusion protocols. He later said, "We built the system to ask what else before it said what now." The Soviets built speed. The Americans built judgment. One raced to apocalypse. The other waited for confirmation. 0040 hours. Red alert. Serpukhov 15. Decision window narrows. 5 signals confirmed by satellite. No ground radar match. Petrov sits still. The room does not breathe. Officers shift. The red phone remains silent. Protocol demands escalation. One word, and Soviet missiles begin fueling. Petrov whispers, "Wait, no launch detected from the US. No secondary wave, nothing." Sky remains dark. External radar confirms negative returns. Console clears. The red lights vanish. The screen returns to green. War was never launched by anyone. The room remains quiet. There's no cheering, no relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement the machine was wrong. In the Kremlin, hours later, the realization begins to sink in. They had almost retaliated against sunlight. Reversal lines. They trusted satellites. They stopped trusting them when clouds nearly ended the world. They believed in automation. They stopped believing when automation asked them to die without a second opinion. They built speed into their survival. They almost didn't survive the speed. Petrov filled out the log. He noted the signals. He marked his hesitation. Then he went home. No award, no promotion, no headline. Officially, he had disobeyed. Unofficially, he had bought the world 40 more years. He was quietly reassigned. The system remained operational. Nothing changed except how close everything had come to ending without a single missile being launched. Final credential drop. Petrov's personnel file remained sealed for 20 years. When declassified, the summary read, "Protocol deviation noted. Situation resolved. No breach, that's how close global annihilation came, and how little was done to stop it from happening again." In the weeks that followed, the Soviet Union reviewed the incident not as a technological failure but as a philosophical one. The systems had done what they were built to do. The satellite saw heat, the console reacted, the process moved forward with absolute obedience. But the conclusion was terrifying. Obedience had almost ended the world. The analysts drafted their internal summaries. They didn't name Petrov. They didn't use the word error. They used a different term, premature escalation risk. The military academy in Voronezh was instructed to revise its early warning doctrine, not publicly, quietly. The revisions began with 4 failures, each more profound than the last. Algorithms versus ambiguity. Soviet systems relied on binary decision-making, heat or no heat, threat or no threat. But the real world lives in the gray. The satellite had no way to say, "I'm unsure." Speed versus sanity faster detection was once seen as the key to survival. But that night, speed almost removed thought. In racing to act first, they had nearly acted wrong. Redundancy versus rigid control. The American system confirmed from multiple sources. The Soviet system treated its satellite like a priest not to be questioned. When it lied, no one was ready to correct it. Observation versus understanding. OKO saw something real, a thermal spike. But it did not understand what it saw. The machine was not curious. It was certain. One internal report summarized the failure with brutal precision. "We built a machine to tell us when to die. We did not teach it how to live." Small reforms followed. Cross-checking was emphasized. Atmospheric modeling teams were expanded. But the core system remained. They had looked into the void through a perfect machine and nearly obeyed it. And in that realization, the Soviet Union glimpsed something darker than nuclear war automation without wisdom. The red alert console still exists, locked in storage. Serpukhov 15 behind 3 blast doors, and a code no one uses anymore. The screen is small. Dust blankets the keys. Faint traces of heat patterns still ghost across the monitor, frozen echoes of a war that never began. Most who pass it now don't know its history. It looks ordinary. Just another obsolete terminal in a decommissioned warning room. But that screen was not just an interface. It was a mirror of fear, of doctrine, of trust placed in numbers, not judgment, of men who believed they had designed certainty and almost destroyed everything in its name. It was proof that apocalypse doesn't announce itself with mushroom clouds. Sometimes, it whispers with 5 red lights. Petrov never touched the launch chain, never entered a missile silo. He never even saw the missiles his decision might have triggered. But his silence was louder than 1,000 warheads. The Cold War didn't end in Berlin. It didn't end in Geneva. It didn't even end in Washington or Moscow. It ended in a sealed bunker. When one man looked at a blinking light and said, "No." The Cold War wasn't won with nuclear fire. It was won with hesitation, with uncertainty, with a refusal to believe that the machine always knows best. It was won by the man who didn't press the button.